If you're looking for not only the most powerful build you can have right now, but also making it stand out and being super clean at the same time, then today you're in for a bit of a treat, as we've teamed up with XPG to make the cleanest possible build we can, thanks to the BTF standard that we've seen have quite a big uptake and rise in popularity as of late. Now, if you're looking for the very best components on the market for high refresh rate, high resolution, all-out gaming, then this one is for you. Because not only will it hit those magic high performance numbers, but it will have extreme levels of airflow and will likely be the cleanest looking build I've ever done, with no visible cables. So let's get straight into the parts. Kicking things off with the CPU, and for this build we use the Intel Core i9-14900K. Now, I know what some of you are going to say. You'll say that this is wasted money and we would have been better off with a 7800X3D. But with 24 cores, 36 threads and a max turbo frequency of 6 GHz, this will provide more than enough performance, not just for gaming, but also being a powerhouse for workload related tasks, making this the perfect all-rounder. With Intel putting a bit more focus on having a mix of performance cores and efficiency cores, this also means that this PC will only be using power when it needs it. So as long as you aren't running at full power all the time, you should see some fairly good power usage, which will be reflected in temperatures and electricity costs. For our motherboard, and the reason we chose the 14900K, we went with the ASUS ROG MAXIMUS Z790 Hero BTF, an absolute beast of a board that features everything you could want as a gamer or even a content creator. The board features plenty of compatibility for all the newest hardware, including a PCIe Gen 5 X16 slot as well as an M.2 slot with QLatch technology. It also features Wi-Fi 7 with Quick Connect antenna and 2.5G Ethernet. And there's also support for up to 192GB of DDR5, that all-important RGB, and of course the most important aspect of this board, the BTF form factor, where we actually find all the connectors on the backside of the board. Now, an interesting addition to the rear of the motherboard is actually the 12VH PWR connector that feeds power to a slot on the front of the board that can deliver up to 600 watts of power directly to the GPU without needing to have a cable on display. And this is a very unique way of implementing the feature, though will only work with ASUS GPUs that have that extra connector, though who knows what the future holds, as we may see this implemented in a more widespread manner. Speaking of the GPU, we went with the ASUS ROG STRIX RTX 4090 OC, and our reasoning should be, well, pretty obvious. It's the best you can buy, it's the cream of the crop, it's the creme de la creme. If money is no object, this is what you're buying. On top of that, this particular card is actually BTF compliant, which means it can take advantage of the power slot built right into the motherboard and get all the power that it needs without having to run a cable in front of it. With this GPU coming with a huge total of 16,384 CUDA cores, 24GB of GDDR6X memory and a 340-bit bus, you'll be receiving amazing gaming performance from this GPU. But with that 24GB of VRAM and the addition of NVENC encoders, the 4090 also manages to cement itself as the go-to for workload related tasks, and in particular video rendering, which, well, we happen to do a lot of around here if you hadn't noticed. In terms of storage, we have a 2TB XPG GAMMIX S70 blade to ensure we have plenty of storage that will load Windows and all of our games smoothly. With read speeds up to 7400 megabytes a second and write speeds up to 6800 megabytes a second, this is more than enough for both gaming and workload related tasks. Depending on your uses, however, you may find that 2TB isn't enough for you, which is why this drive comes in up to a whopping 8TB. We don't need that for what we're doing here today, but it is an option if you need more space and still want to have those blistering fast speeds. For our memory, we ended up choosing the XPG LANCER RGB, and as you can tell, this is partly to keep the XPG theme going, but mostly because it hits all the right boxes for our use case. We have a 48GB kit running at 7200 MHz, so we are taking full advantage of the 14900K's ability to use faster memory speeds, whilst also taking advantage of more efficient memory capacities, which means we aren't going overboard, and we're still getting great performance, all by just using 2 modules. Finally, and of course the most important part of all in terms of keeping this build clean and stylish, it has RGB. To keep things cool, we've gone for the XPG LEVANTE X360. With this being a 360mm cooler, it has no problems cooling down the beastly 14900K. But we're not only getting huge performance out of this cooler, but we're also getting looks too, as it comes supplied with triple ARGB fans and an ARGB pump head with an infinity mirror design. Aesthetics are going to play a big role in this build, as since we're doing a BTF build, we are removing as many cables as we can from site, which means we need to make sure that what you do see looks the best it can and fits together nicely. Now, what's going to power all this hardware? Well, for that we have an XPG Fusion 1600 watt titanium PSU, which is an absolute monster of a power supply. As the name suggests, this unit can provide up to 1600 watts of power, which is easily enough for all the highest spec components like we have here today. Equipped with all the connectors and features you would expect from an ATX 3.1 compliant power supply, it provides not only tons of power output, but also runs efficiently since it is 80 plus and Cybernetics titanium rated. Of course, one of the most useful features for our uses today is the addition of the native 12VH PWR connector, allowing us to power our GPU without the need for an adapter. And if you do have the need for it, it actually comes with a second connector for up to 2 GPUs without the need for any adapters. And we can plug this directly in to the rear of the motherboard. So the big one, what are we going to house these high-end parts in? Well, that's where the XPG INVADER X BTF mid-tower case comes in. Now, we first saw this case at Computex where we were impressed by pretty much everything about it, from the initial looks all the way down to the cooling potential. So we were eager to get our hands on this case to do a build in as soon as possible. And now that day has arrived. The INVADER X manages to house up to an ATX motherboard and has a ton of room for high-end components, such as power supplies up to 240mm in length, CPU coolers up to 175mm in height, as well as having plenty of space for GPUs, as it can hold up to a 400mm GPU in either the regular orientation or a vertical mount using the included bracket, which is handy because the GPU that we're using is one of the biggest on the market. It follows a fish tank design which has become ever more popular as of late, though it doesn't skimp on cooling potential and there's plenty of options with support for up to a whopping 10 fans, and actually comes included with 5, of which 4 of them are reverse fans. So keeping your PC cool should be no worries, even with the very best components on the market, while the aesthetics are going to do wonders for the styling. Okay, so for anyone who's ever seen one of our builds, you'll know that we want to do as much as we physically can outside of the case. It just makes life so much easier. We have also got 2 cameras, we've got the one ahead and also the one above, so hopefully you guys kind of get a nice look at everything. And yeah, so we've got a few things on the table. Motherboard, we've got our processor, we've got our SSD, we've got our memory, and our handy dandy eTeknix toolkit, which is available on store.eteknix.com. For the most part though, we're only actually going to need the screwdriver itself, I think it's a Phillips 2, and then a smaller one for potentially for SSDs. So motherboard, MAXIMUS Z790 BTF. So this whole build is all about BTF. It's all about trying to make this as clean as kind of physically possible. So as I mentioned, we want to try and build as much as we can actually, outside of the case. It just makes life so much easier being able to do that. So we'll start with the processor. Don't need the box anymore. Comes in this shiny sort of wafer casing. 14900K. Now we could have gone with the 14900KS, but well, I don't have one, so that's kind of the main reason. But yeah, we wanted to, try and keep this as high end as physically possible. Now with the motherboard, when it does come to installing sort of SSDs and things like that, we want to use the top slot. Let's get the CPU in first, and then we'll do the SSD, and then we move over to the memory. So here's the chip itself. For anyone who hasn't ever built their own PC before, or just, wants a little bit of a refresher, we will try and go through kind of, the proper way to do it. So we're going to lift up the arm like that, lift up the socket cover like that, and then it can only really go in one way because it does have sort of little notches on there. So if it feels and looks like it's not going in the right way, then yeah, it's wrong. But generally speaking, when the motherboard's upright, you're going to see the text kind of looking like this. So put that down, and that will pop off, and then we can just move the arm back down and lock it into place. So processor done. Now we can move on to the SSD, which obviously we've gone through the parts. We wanted a slightly larger drive, so 2 terabyte is going to be more than enough because this is an extreme gaming build. I think 1 terabyte is not going to be enough, especially with the size of games lately. Now this drive does actually come with 2 parts. You've got the drive itself, and then you've got a cover. That is especially handy for not only aesthetics, but it has got some thermal properties to it as well. But we're not really too fussed about that because we are going to be putting it under this large heatsink. So if we unscrew this one here, and then the one the other side, we can then take this whole heatsink block actually off. And it reveals that we have got some thermal pads here. Now this has been used before, hence why it looks, well, a little bit gammy. We did get this from ASUS, and we don't know kind of where it's been before that. So with the SSD, it can only go in one way because there is a little notch. So on this particular one, it's that way. And then we can move the little latch into place, and that will just sort of lock it into place quite nicely. Now, once we've done that, we can continue to take our heatsink cover again, get it into place, and then we can screw it back down. So with the heatsink in place, the next thing for us to do is the memory. So kind of when it comes to memory, there's been a bit of an uptake recently with different capacities. So we've actually got a 48 gig kit here. So a little bit different from the norm where you'd expect derivatives of sort of 16, 32. This is actually two 24 gig modules. Now this is the Lancer RGB, it's 7200 mega transfers a second. Still got to get my head around the fact that, you know, people are calling it mega transfers a second now and not megahertz, but I don't know, it just feels a bit inferior to me to call it mega transfers, but I don't know. Let me know in the comment section, what do you sort of generally call it? Mega transfers, or are you still quite old school and you're set in your ways and sort of calling it megahertz? Now, when it comes to the memory, there is a little notch that is ever so slightly offset. And generally speaking, if you can't sort of work out if it's offset to that side or that side, there's normally a barcode label on one side that generally goes facing towards the CPU socket. So getting that into place and push it down. It may feel like it's a little bit like it doesn't want to go. Just double check where the notch is. Like I say, the barcode thing, 90% of the time is, you know, what it's meant to be, and it is meant to be facing that way, but it's not always the case. There are exceptions to the rule. So this is basically our system pretty much ready to go. Now, there is one thing I like to do, which really is dependent on the platform that you're using, whether it be AMD, whether it be Intel, is looking at what you actually need to do in terms of the CPU socket for cooling. Now, if this was AMD, some coolers use the existing lugs. Because it is Intel, it doesn't actually have sort of any lugs, any retention brackets. So we do need to put one on. So it's always advisable to get your AIO or your CPU cooler and figure out what kind of system it has in place as to how it screws down, because you want to try and do as much as you can outside the case before actually transplanting this into the case, where you've got to kind of reach around the back of the case and you've got to try and screw things in. It's just a lot easier doing it like this. So what we have here is a bracket which is actually multi-use. So depending on kind of which platform you're using, you can move these little bits sort of back and forth. So it's just a matter of sliding that underneath. There are 4 little holes around the CPU socket, and we can just get the first one into place and then the other 4, like so. Once we've done that, we can get the relevant standoffs, which normally, if you are using an AIO or even an air cooler, they will actually be labeled as well. So these ones said socket 1700. Now what I generally like to do is put one in, and then kind of just a rule of thumb is get the other one in the opposite corner. Then once you've done that, you can continue to do the other 2 without holding what is, especially in this case, quite a heavy motherboard, because everything will be held in place by itself. And we can just put it down like that and get the other 2 in. So with everything in place, you can see we've got all 4 of our standoffs ready to take our CPU cooler when we actually get it inside the case. So moving on to the case, this is the INVADER X BTF. Now, I really like this case for one major reason. Obviously, it is BTF, that's kind of one of the reasons, but the fact that they actually include quite a lot of case fans as standard. So normally with other vendors, you do end up getting sort of, you know, 1 fan at the front, 1 fan at the rear. This one actually comes with 5. So we've got 3 down the side by the motherboard tray. We've got 1 at the bottom, and then we've got 1 at the rear. But there is a slight difference because, as you can see, the 3 that are actually on the motherboard side are facing the correct way. And that's because they are reverse fans. So really nice to see that. Now, if we go to take the side panel off, by the looks of it, we actually need to take the top panel off first to then release the side. So we'll do that. But as I mentioned, it is always nice kind of stripping it down as far as we can, just to kind of give you, you know, free roam as to kind of what you're dealing with. So that actually slides up, which is quite interesting. There must be a reason why they've kind of gone ahead with that approach, but yeah, quite nice to see. Now, in terms of the front, I'm not sure if that one actually comes off. It looks, okay, it does. So we can push that out. So it looks like they're all on sort of pops. Maybe on that side there might be, okay, so there is actually a screw on this side. So if I put this down, we can actually see it a little bit better on the top view camera. Looks like there's a screw here that we can take off and one down the bottom. And then we should be able to take that off. Again, just giving us more space to kind of work with. Now, looking at the case itself, if we turn it over, we have got a pretty, empty frame now. We can start actually putting stuff into it. So for the most part, we have got obviously the motherboard with our storage, with our memory, with our processor, and cooling essentially ready to go. So what we can do is take the motherboard, and you can see actually, obviously with this being BTF, and I'll show you on the motherboard as well, where we have all of the connectors on the motherboard, but also all of the cutouts on here specifically made for this standard. So moving the fan cables kind of out of the way ever so slightly, we can then position this into place. Now I will actually be honest, this is only the second, I think, BTF build that I've ever done. So it's actually quite an exciting time for me as well. And I've already marked it up with fingerprints quite heavily, but we will give that a clean off. But straight away, you can see things are starting to come together and things look extremely clean. Okay, so let's talk about the cooling side of things. So we do have 3 fans down here. We do have one at the bottom and then we've got the one at the rear, but we do have space at the top for a 360mm rad. So what I'm thinking is if I move this around, by the way, really cool feature. Air filter actually comes out of the side of the case and just kind of slides in and kind of looks really sleek and flush. So what we're going to do, if I turn it like that, is we've already put the fans on because we do want the fans on the inside. And if we sort of just visualize how things are going to look, I think, yeah, probably that way is going to look the best. And then we can come down with the block sort of sitting there. Now, generally speaking, when I was doing a build like this, if it wasn't BTF, I would predominantly be looking at putting in the 8-pin power connectors because it sits in this sort of top left part of the motherboard. It's really hard to do when you put an AIO in there. This being BTF, we don't have to worry because it's all on the back. So we can look at getting this into place quite nicely and not have to worry about sort of any cables and things like that. Now, I did say at the beginning this was a cableless build, but of course with the AIO, there is some cables on there. They haven't quite got around to, I guess, getting around that problem as of yet, but you never know what the future holds. They may do something that just, allows them to somehow route it through the motherboard or something along them lines. But for now, I can't really see them coming up with any form of solution that's going to kind of work with a build like this as of yet. So with the AIO in place, the main thing now is just the CPU block itself. We do have 2 cables coming off of it. One of them is for the 4-pin PWM on there, and then the other one is for that all-important RGB, and that will go through the back as well. But let's not worry about the cables just yet. What we actually want to do is get thermal paste onto it. So again, inside my handy-dandy eTeknix toolkit, I've always got a tube of thermal paste. Now, some AIOs will come with thermal paste included, as well as CPU coolers, some don't. This one may have, but we have used it before, so yeah, that's why it hasn't got any on there now. We just want to put some out. And I know I'm going to get flamed in the comments now for, Andy, you use this method and you should have used the line method or this other method. There's so many methods out there and other people have done tests and things like that to show, well, there's not really much in it. So we're going to take off the little plastic protective bit, cables kind of out of the way, and then we can look at lowering it into place. Like so. We have got the tubes on the bottom. Off camera, we did sort of toy around with different orientations and things like that. But we decided tubes at the bottom would look the cleanest. And then again, we're going to put the first screw in, then go for the other one. And on this bracket, they actually do label them. I'm hoping the camera can kind of pick it up, but they are labeled 1, 2, 3, and 4. So essentially you do it in that kind of cross pattern. So done the first one, done the second one, number 3 up here, screw that in, and then do number 4. So turning the case up like this, we can see kind of how things are coming together a little bit. Really, this is, well, essentially done. I mean, the processor has built-in graphics, so you could just run it like this. You could put the sides on and sort of off you go. But obviously we're going to put a graphics card in, but not yet. The graphics card's going to go in here, and because this is BTF, and the fact that ASUS have gone one step further with the BTF side of things, because a lot of brands out there are doing BTF, but you still need to run a 12VH PWR or 2 8-pins or whatever. With what ASUS are doing, you actually have this extra connector here. So we've got our X16, then we've got this extra connector there, which basically transforms to the other side, and on there you have a 12VH PWR connector which feeds it power. But then you do have to specifically buy a graphics card from ASUS, like the RTX 4090 BTF that we've got, which will harness that. But you can still run a cable, and XPG have thought about that by having this little cutout down here. Now, what I want to do is actually turn this over so you can get kind of an idea as to what's going on this side. We are going to unscrew this plate here because we're not using any hard drives. We're not using any 2.5-inch SSDs. So technically we don't actually need this panel. Though even if you did need it, you'd probably want to remove it because it just gives you access to kind of everything that's going on back here. Now we have got everything cable tied sort of up. So we do need to sort of take all this apart so that we can get to all of our relevant cables. And XPG have actually done a really good job here of having these sort of tie down Velcro cable ties. But if you do want to buy more, then you can over on store.eteknix.com because we do sell our own branded ones. But that will then allow us to take our USB-C, our HD audio, our USB 3.1 for the front panel, and then also our front panel headers as well. And we can get these all connected. And again, because this is BTF, we've got sort of connectors here for front panel, we've got fans, we've got USB Type-C is up here as well. So yeah, we just need to get all that connected in, and then essentially we're good to go to get the power supply in and also the all-important graphics card. So in terms of the cable management, it looks like an absolute rat's nest, but we can kind of figure that out after. But I am kind of more about the all-important, you know, making sure the business side looks good. Now, we do have to think about power, so there's no point really doing anything in terms of the cable management yet because we are going to put quite a few more cables into there. So if I move that off to the side and then grab this beast of a power supply, which is the XPG Fusion 1600 Titanium. Now we actually saw this at Computex, I want to say last year, and what we saw was it running 4 RTX 4090s from ASUS ROG, so it had no problem running them whatsoever. It's not the smallest unit in the world, and I guess was a little bit worried about it fitting inside of our case, but I think we're going to be okay. But if we're not, we'll edit it and we're just, you know, get rid of that part of it. So we are going to think about sort of what cables we're actually going to need for this power supply. So SATA, I mean, sometimes you do have to look at the device, even though you sort of think, I haven't used any SSDs, I haven't used any hard drives. You got to remember sometimes that it might come with a fan controller of some kind, so you might need SATA. For us, doesn't look like we actually have to worry about that whatsoever. All the RGB is daisy chain, so it makes things nice and easy. In terms of PCI Express, we don't need that because we do have that all-important 12VH PWR connector, which is going to power our graphics card from behind the motherboard. So it's just really going through and seeing exactly what you need. More PCI Express. I'm expecting to see a lot of PCI Express here because it's a 1600 watt power supply. Now I have actually found the one that we do need. This is an EPS connector. On our particular motherboard, we do actually have 2 8-pin connectors. So we do need to find another one of them. SATA, and then there is the other one, which these are really handy because on this unit, you can, if I pull this off, you can split the 8-pin into 2 4-pins if I can figure out exactly how to split it. Sometimes they, yeah, like this one, they actually push up. So all you do is you sort of push that up and then that splits it into 2 4-pins. So depending on your motherboard, that will give you an idea as to kind of what you need. 12VH PWR that can power up to 600 watts worth of power, which you know with an RTX 4090, we are going to definitely be needing that. Does have another 12VH PWR, PCI Express. I'm looking for the all-important 24-pin. So with the cables that we need, which I think that is about right, we can actually look at getting them plugged in to the unit. So for the power supply, we need to unscrew this bracket because, again, case dependent, sometimes your power supply actually slides in from the side. I've always preferred these ones, which basically have a bracket, which you can then grab your screw, you screw the bracket into the power supply, and then it slides in from the back. It just kind of gives you a little bit more freedom with the cable management side of things. So we can screw the first one in like that, get the other screws and get all them into place. And again, with anything like this, I'd always advise not tightening it all the way, because sometimes you'll find that it just kind of misaligns where the screws actually got a thread into the power supply or whatever kind of, part you're actually doing. But it just allows you to line things up a little bit better. So that one into there, then you can tighten that one down and just go back through and tighten up the rest. Now, when it comes to the power supply, we have got a fan on there. There is a dust filter on the bottom. So what we're actually going to now do is take all of our cables through here and back out the side. And then that will allow us to push our power supply into place, and then we can just screw it back down using these 4 screws. Now, normally putting a power supply of kind of this size in a case of this size, I'd be a little bit worried about because, well, there isn't really any room here for kind of cable management. Normally you just stuff all your cables kind of into this crevice. There's still a good, probably inch or so, maybe, sort of 15 centimeters, 10 centimeters, something like that. But I'm not actually too fussed because it's actually quite deep inside this case. So when it comes to plugging in our EPS connectors up here, and another one up here next to it, this can all basically just sort of sit. We could cable manage, and tie this down and things like that, but there's still plenty of room. Now, the biggest one is always a 24 pin because it is, well, generally the thickest. But again, I'm not even sort of too fussed about that because when it goes into place, which is going to be here, it's going to sit like that. And again, we've got this cable channel that we can just sort of lay it down into. So there really isn't any problems with kind of the cable management side of things. And I will do some light cable management, or I might cheat and get Brandon to do it while I'm off camera. But, again, we might just edit that out. But Jamie's now probably going to keep it in because I said it. But yeah, other than that, we've got our 12VH PWR connector. That is going to go onto there. And again, both of these can just sort of lay down. Now, not completely sort of, happy with that, but I'm not fussed for it right now because now we really are starting to get a machine that is really starting to kind of take shape. The only thing that we're really missing is the graphics card. So, mentioned at the start what one we're using, and I've mentioned quite a few times actually throughout this video. This is the one that we're going for because, go big or go home. This is the RTX 4090 BTF edition. This is probably highly regarded as, one of the best on the market. I guess if EVGA was still, making graphics cards, you could argue that there was, some competition there. You could say, obviously, MSI with the Supreme X, but I think, ASUS ROG STRIX, that's where kind of, the holy grail of graphics cards is. So, and the thing I like about sort of ROG stuff as well is it's always a bit of an experience, not just with the graphics card, but kind of, the box, the unboxing experience. It's sort of, and here it is. It's not small, I'm not going to lie, by any stretch of the imagination. It is an absolute monster. As you can see, and this is probably the most interesting thing, this is where you would have your 12VH PWR connector. So they do utilize, the same body for the graphics card, but this is essentially where the 12VH PWR would be. And there just isn't one there because when you look at the bottom where we've got this 16 pin, we have this extra connector, which is going to go into our motherboard. And that's actually going to give us the power that we need. So let's put that off to one side, get rid of these boxes and get that card installed into the system. Now, when it comes to the expansion slots on the case, things can get a little bit tricky, but they've actually thought about this. So with some cases, you get the sort of snap out ones. With some, you get the sort of screwed in ones. XPG have always been really, really big on trying to make things functional, but also being affordable at the same time. So on this one, you do actually have to bend them out. But the problem that we now have is the motherboard's in place. But they've thought about that, because what you can actually do is you can unscrew this whole bracket, which does allow you to take this out. And then they do have another one which comes supplied with a case, which is basically that way, so you can have your vertical mount. But it now allows you to take the expansion cover, which you just kind of twist back and forth to pop it out. And we have sort of looked at it. We do need slots 2 and 3. And that way we haven't actually scratched our motherboard or anything. And then we can just take that and get it back into place nice and simply by screwing it back down. Then we can take our graphics card, and as I mentioned, we have got our X16 slot connector here, and then this other connector here. They both line up perfectly, and we can just look to get that into place like so, and then we can screw it down on the back, and away we go. We don't even need to put a cable in, and things are looking pretty damn sweet. Okay, so moment of truth. Does it turn on? Flick it on there. Power button's just down here on this. And there we go. Never had any doubt. And I think you're going to agree with me. It looks absolutely amazing with all the RGB fans on there. And this case just kind of further extends the, I guess, the aesthetics of it. The fact that it does have a fishbowl design and is a BTF form factor. I actually want to say, and I probably say this every single time we do a BTF build, but I think this is one of the cleanest looking builds I've ever done. Now, in terms of the performance, we are going to look at that. So let's see exactly how this performs in some of the latest and hottest titles. And of course, we're going to be putting them on max settings.
First up is Cyberpunk 2077, which at 4K on max settings with ray tracing set to ultra and DLSS and frame gen enabled. It delivered a steady 140 to 150 frames per second. Achieving this level of performance is no mean feat, especially considering that this title on these settings can challenge even the most respectable systems. But our combination of a 14900K and RTX 4090 handles it like a champ. Next up is Hogwarts Legacy, which maintains a range of between 90 to 100 frames per second for the most part across its varied environments, with peaks reaching anywhere up to 120 FPS, and again this is running at 4K on max settings with ray tracing on and set to ultra with DLSS enabled. In Remnant II it's more of the same. At 4K ultra with DLSS enabled, it delivers impressive performance, consistently holding between 170 and 190 frames per second. Even during intense combat scenes, frame rates do dip, but only slightly, rarely falling below 160 FPS and seeing the system as a whole barely break a sweat. Next up is Spider-Man, and as expected, this system handles it effortlessly. Performance hovers around 200 frames per second at 4K with ray tracing set to the max, and again with DLSS enabled to help boost our frame rate. And this rarely saw it dip below 160 FPS, delivering buttery smooth gameplay while giving us amazing graphics at the same time. Finally, we have Ratchet and Clank, and you may have guessed it, as it performs incredibly well, holding a consistent 140 FPS on 4K with very high settings and ray tracing enabled, again with DLSS enabled at the same time to help boost the performance up that's lost by maxing out these settings and enabling ray tracing.
Okay, so performance kind of speaks for itself. We knew that performance was going to be great. I mean, when you look at the specs of what's actually inside this system in terms of flagship high-end processor from the 14th gen, obviously under Z790, the motherboard is, you know, one of the highest end that you can physically get. The BTF form factor is obviously more about aesthetics than anything else, but we've also got that amazing looking 4090 in there with the extra connector, which means that we don't have to have a power connector. I think there's a big problem with some BTF sort of base systems where they try and do as much as they can, but then you still have the graphics card needing a 12VH PWR or 8 pins or 6 pins or whatever. With this, obviously, it just completely eliminates that. So really happy with the way that this turned out. Now, in terms of the components, I think we've actually, chosen things really well here. I always like to have, let's call it a balanced system. And I think this is definitely there. We've got that high-end CPU, high-end GPU combo, blistering fast NVMe, enough memory for, the kind of average gamer or enthusiast. And overall, I think this is all about the aesthetics. Yes, performance is great, but it's all about the looks. And I think it's safe to say that The fishbowl design is obviously something that isn't going to go away anytime soon. It's something that was started off and other brands have sort of, you know, worked on it and made it better over time. And I think XPG have done a really, really good job with this case. It feels solid, it's affordable in the grand scheme of things, and it just gives you that kind of, you know, showcase design, which is what these types of cases are all about. Now, one thing I would like to see, and this is more, I guess, aimed towards GPU manufacturers, motherboard manufacturers. So I'm kind of, I guess, going to talk about ASUS a little bit here. When it comes to BTF, we are only really looking at getting BTF on the high end of the kind of market. So 4090, Z790, sort of, you know, extreme and hero motherboards. I'd like to see that sort of trickle down more to the mainstream, because you can get cases like this. You can get obviously fans, and on this one we have got the ones with the reverse blades and everything, but you can get products that do hit that mainstream market, but then there's nothing really to kind of pair it with when it comes to the other components like the graphics card and the motherboard. So I'd like to see that trickle down more to the mainstream level where it becomes more affordable, but people can still have that choice of having an affordable system that is also going to, you know, look amazing because, well, there's no cables. Other than that, I think that's about going to wrap it up for this one. I'm really, really happy with the way that this has turned out. And let me know if you want to see more builds, not just on a BTF sort of scale, but other builds as well. Sometimes when we make these videos, people really, really love the build. So let us know in the comment section. Obviously, let us know by putting a like on this video as to if you want to see more content like this, where we build a system, put it through its paces in games, and then sort of, you know, show it off to you guys as to what is possible depending on the budget that you've got and kind of what your general needs are for a build. Overall though, I'm really happy with this, and I'm actually kind of sad that I'm going to have to take it apart. But luckily, taking it apart is going to be very, very easy because we haven't really got to worry too much about cables, connectors and that, because they are all on one side. And well, that's what BTF is all about. So there you go. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, a like and a sub would be absolutely amazing. And if you love what we do, then consider supporting us over on Patreon, where you'll get access to a whole host of exclusive goodies like behind the scenes content, bi-weekly game nights, access to a lot of our testing data, and so much more. Yeah, the link for all of that good stuff is down below. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one. See you later, guys. Bye-bye.